the dust of Redemption Gulch settled heavy on everything, a constant reminder of the hard-scrabble life. For Sarah, it felt particularly thick, clinging to her worn dress and the weariness in her young eyes. Ever since the fever stole her parents, she'd been living at Widow Higgins's boarding house, less a resident and more a drudge, scrubbing floors until her hands ached, mending other folks' tears while her own heart felt frayed. That was her daily bread. The townsfolk, etched with the harsh lines of the frontier, mostly passed her by, their gazes indifferent, sometimes even laced with a pity that stung worse than scorn. Then, one sweltering afternoon, a lone figure appeared on the horizon, growing steadily from a speck to a man on a dusty roan. He rode with a quiet dignity, a stillness that spoke of solitude and keen observation. His name was Jedediah. He wasn't one for pleasantries or boasts. He simply rode in, tied his horse by the saloon, and his gaze, as it swept the street, lingered for a moment on Sarah as she wrestled with a heavy bucket, a silent acknowledgment in his deep-set eyes. Jedediah took a room at the boarding house. He was a man of few words, his presence a quiet anchor amidst the comings and goings. At mealtimes, he'd sit, observing, his gaze often falling on Sarah, the way Widow Higgins's sharp voice directed her, the way the other boarders seemed blind to her tireless efforts, the almost imperceptible droop of her shoulders. One sun-baked morning, Sarah was struggling with a sack of flour, its weight threatening to pull her down the porch steps. Suddenly, it slipped. Before she could cry out, strong, calloused hands steadied it. Jedediah. Their eyes met. His held a quiet strength, a glint of something akin to understanding. He righted the sack, a slight nod his only communication, before continuing into the dimness of the boarding house, leaving Sarah with a flutter in her chest she couldn't quite name. The days that followed unfolded with small, unspoken acts of kindness, a single, hardy desert bloom left on the sill of her small window, a loose floorboard on the porch, the one that always creaked under her weight, silently repaired. Once, when a group of young cowboys, fueled by cheap whiskey, directed their crude humor at Sarah outside the mercantile, Jedediah simply positioned himself nearby, his quiet presence a more effective shield than any harsh word. They shifted uncomfortably and eventually dispersed. Sarah, who had known little but neglect, found herself watching this silent man. His quietude wasn't cold. It felt like a deep well of thoughtfulness. She saw the gentleness in his hands when he tended his horse, the way his gaze softened almost imperceptibly when it rested on her. Widow Higgins, a woman whose heart had long since been weathered by life, saw Jedediah as a reliable boarder. The other townsfolk remained curious, a little wary of the taciturn stranger. But in Sarah's heart, a fragile tendril of hope began to unfurl. During a Sunday gathering where a traveling preacher spoke of kindness, a sudden gust of wind scattered his sermon notes. Sarah, ever eager to help, rushed to gather them, but several sheets danced away on the breeze. Without a word, Jedediah mounted his roan, and with a surprising grace, he gently herded the papers back towards her, his movements economical and sure. Their eyes met, and this time, a small, genuine smile touched Sarah's lips. A silent thank you. The shift came at the town picnic, a rare moment of communal gathering. Sarah, predictably, found herself serving, her efforts blending into the background. A clumsy spill of lemonade brought a sharp reprimand from a matronly woman. Just as Sarah's face crumpled, Jedediah stepped forward. He didn't scold or lecture. He simply knelt, helping Sarah mop up the sticky mess, and then, in a gesture that drew the attention of the entire gathering, offered her his own untouched plate of food. The silence that fell was heavy with unspoken recognition. This quiet man, who kept to himself, had shown a profound respect for the town's overlooked soul. From that day on, a subtle change rippled through Redemption Gulch. People noticed Jedediah's quiet regard. Some, perhaps touched by his unspoken example, offered Sarah a nod, a slightly warmer tone. One crisp morning, Jedediah found Sarah tending a few struggling flowers near the boarding house. He held out a small, hand-carved wooden bird, its details surprisingly intricate. It was a simple thing, but it was the first gift given freely to her, without expectation. Their fingers brushed as she accepted it, a silent current passing between them. Then, he spoke. His voice, low and a little rough, held a surprising tenderness. "They need water, Sarah." It was a small beginning, but a beginning nonetheless. In the quiet evenings, he would sit with her on the porch, his presence a comforting weight beside her. He listened, mostly in silence, as she spoke of her lost parents, her voice soft with memory. He learned of her quiet dreams, of a life beyond servitude, a place where she was seen. One afternoon, Jedediah had a brief private conversation with Widow Higgins. Whatever was said, the next morning, Sarah's duties were lighter. She took her meals with the others, treated with a newfound, if still somewhat reserved, respect. Then came the day Jedediah stood before Sarah, the vast undulating plain stretching behind him. There were no grand pronouncements, no bended knee. He simply looked at her, his steady gaze conveying a depth of feeling that words often failed to capture. He held out his hand, calloused and strong. Sarah looked at that hand, the one that had saved the spilled flower, offered her sustenance, and gifted her a small piece of carved beauty. She placed her own, smaller hand in his. Without a word, he helped her onto his roan. He settled her gently before him, and they rode out of Redemption Gulch, leaving behind the dust and the echoes of unkindness. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Sarah leaned against Jedediah, a profound sense of peace settling in her heart. In his quiet strength, she had found a love that saw her not as the dirt others treated her like, but as something precious, something worthy. She was, in his silent devotion, finally, a queen. Their journey into the vast unknown had just begun, a journey built on a love that spoke volumes without uttering a single unnecessary word.